It's likely that many of us would have heard tales of a rider in the dark that has no head, a headless horseman that scours the countryside bringing death and darkness to all those it comes across. Stories of headless horsemen were told in several European countries, as well as in many more from all around the world, but today's video will focus mainly on the dulahan, a spirit that appears in Irish folklore, which also means it can be classified as a fairy. But we're certainly not talking about Tinkerbell, nor the type of fairy that you'd stick on top of your Christmas tree. No, in this case the term fairy simply refers to spirits and supernatural entities found within European folklore. As with many aspects of Irish folklore, the dulahan does have Celtic influences, stemming from the worship of Crum Duv, a Celtic deity whose name meant the Dark One, and who himself was thought to have an African origin. The worship of Crum Duv is often associated with human sacrifice, and perhaps that is why the dulahan is seen as a spirit that comes to claim one's soul. It's usually depicted as a headless rider dressed in black riding a black horse, though at times it can be seen riding a carriage drawn by 6 black horses, which is usually referred to as the silent coach or the death coach. This idea of the dulahan as the coachman to the afterlife is an interesting idea, and one that we will discuss later in some more detail. Now back to the rider iteration of the dulahan. Despite being what many considered to be the headless horseman, the dulahan wasn't always seen as a man, as many believed it could also appear as a female. But there's no discernible differences between the male and female version. They both still rode a black horse and carried their head around with them. The dulahan is just most commonly depicted as a male figure. The head of the dulahan may not be attached to its shoulders, but that doesn't mean that it's not of any use. The head itself is described as having an ever-present sinister grin, with eyes that constantly move from left to right, and whose glare can be seen in the darkest of night. There are stories that say the head of the horseman has been imbued with supernatural sight that allows the horseman to see great distances. By lifting his head up high above where his head should have been, the dulahan can scout the land before setting out on his ride. So what exactly does the dulahan do other than roam the countryside looking menacing? We mentioned earlier that those who come across a dulahan rarely live to tell the tale, but some do survive. It's said that if you are not who the horseman seeks, but are still unlucky enough to cross his path, he may spare you. But this still comes at a price, and that price is your sight. Anyone who looks directly at the dulahan will immediately be blinded, and even if you divert your gaze, the horseman will ensure that you never see again, by either throwing a bucket of blood into your eyes or lashing them with a whip made from a human spine. Neither of which sound particularly fun. Now for those of you thinking, well that's fine, I'll just shut my eyes, draw the curtains and bolt the door so the dulahan can never get to me. Sadly that wouldn't really work, as all manner of locks, gates and windows fly open when the horseman is near. Even if you happen to be the greatest hide and seek player of all time, the dulahan simply only has to say your name and you'll drop dead. Essentially what I'm saying is if the dulahan is after you, you may as well say goodbye to your loved ones because you can't hide and you certainly can't run. But the horseman does have one weakness, an aversion to gold. So carrying around a piece of gold such as a coin may buy you some time, but it certainly won't deter him forever. As we mentioned earlier, there are tales of the dulahan riding through the countryside in a horse-drawn carriage, even being referred to as the coachman to the afterlife. This in itself is quite interesting because it's a recurring theme that we see in other cultures across the world. Greek mythology has its boatman and Hermes, Egypt has its guide Anubis, Japan has the Shinigami, and in more modern times we all know of the Grim Reaper. The dulahan essentially performs this same role except in his carriage that travels so fast it would set fire to nearby bushes and grass. The carriage's arrival signaled the death of a family member, but unlike the banshee that was seen primarily as a warning, wherever the silent coach went, death shortly followed. I guess the one question that most of you have been waiting to be answered this entire video is whether there's any significance behind the dulahan being headless. Now this could definitely just be to make the dulahan appear more terrifying, but I did come across some stories where the Celtic people believed the head was where the soul was located. When an enemy was defeated in battle, their head would be taken as a trophy, because it was seen as a great source of spiritual power and protection from one's enemies and the supernatural. There have been quite a few modern interpretations of the dulahan and the legend of the Headless Horseman, with one of the most famous being Washington Irvine's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which was later adapted into a film in 1999. It plays around with the idea that the horseman can be enchanted and manipulated into doing someone's bidding, killing people on their behalf. It's definitely an interesting read or watch if the Headless Horseman is something that does interest you. There are so many stories of the Headless Horseman from all around the world that if you'd like to see another video covering them all, then let me know in the comments below. As always, I've been your host, Mythology and Fiction Explained.